all right, I'm just going to get things going. And then people, I'm sure, are going to be hopping on like throughout. At least we don't have that magical ding. I turned that off, so you don't have to hear that throughout the whole thing.
I check my door really fast. No, I'm good.
Yeah. So if you could for me, just like introduce yourself, kind of tell us a little bit about you, and then we'll go through everything.
Sure. Josh Henkin, and I'm the creator of the Dynamic Variable Resistance Training System, and obviously the Ultimate Sandbag. That's a big part of our system. I've been in the industry for about 20 years. Started off actually in strength conditioning. I got my degree from Arizona State in exercise phys. Interned there for a while. Decided I didn't really want to go down the horrible route of strength conditioning, and by that I mean extremely long hours, no pay, and a lot of frustration. So I made the brilliant move instead to go privately, which I don't know was kind of a lateral move for a lot of people. You get different frustration, long hours, and not a lot of pay in a different way. But I ended up running my own facility for about a decade. During that time, sort of what we are doing now came about really organically, just basically trying to solve a need for ourselves, and it grew into something much more. And so now I spend my time traveling and teaching, which is really great for me because I know how hard the industry is. I know how hard it is to give a great experience and result to members and clients, and to be able to be hopefully a solution for other coaches is really what we're all about.
Awesome. So I have a big question for you at the very beginning here. Because like I told you, I kind of like reached out to Fury and like, hey, you know, like what's some good questions to ask Josh? And
hopefully not heroin.
The biggest, yeah. Well, I'm there with you.
You got the uniform, huh? You got the uniform, yeah.
Yeah. Everyone that walks by that's bald, she's like, do you know him?
Exactly.
So where do you think our fitness industry is short-sighted, and where could we improve?
I mean,
overall.
I think the major problem is just, I mean, and this is going to be ironic, and you as an education coordinator can probably appreciate this, is this like, we don't have a lot of good education. A friend of mine, I give the example, works with a lot of troubled youth, high school kids that are not going to go to college. They're going to go probably to some vocational schools and so forth, which is fine. They're not going to make college for one reason or the other. And he sent me a link to an article. It was by career trends. It was all these careers you can do without high school diploma. And there's things like retail, waitressing, and I kid you not, like the third thing down the line was personal training. And right below that was housekeeping. So, I mean, it's one of the few industries I think is that rare that you can have people with PhDs and masters, and then you can have people that literally take the weekend certifications, and you know they're in the same industry and basically sometimes the same level. And just because you go to a formal education doesn't mean you're better, but just like we don't have this common ground. And basically that, I think, plays a role in why there's such mass confusion upon what's the right technique or method or philosophy, because we don't have a common language with where we're coming from with how to actually approach things. I think if you look at, you know, things like the medical community or physical therapy, there's at least a baseline where people has an agreement of like, okay, this happens, we do this. And for us, I mean, and one thing we talk a lot about is like, we don't even understand or have the same language as far as what term means. Like people don't understand what functional training means. And so we get all this, you know, rigmarole on social media about arguments of, oh, it's this, it's that, this is stupid, this is great. And so without having that common ground and really having an educational system that has some formality to it, I think it's hard for us to communicate and build better systems for a lot of the facilities, the coaches, the people that are just, we're all after the same thing of trying to help people. So I think in that regards, that's our big downfall. We have a lot of educational courses that are masking themselves as user courses for different equipment rather than actually education. And so I think it's one of those things that, you know, unfortunately, without having a standard of education for our industry, we're always going to be battling such a dichotomy of different levels of professionalism.
No, I 100% agree with you. And that's why it's like good that there's people out there like you that are like creating systems, right? When it's not just another certification, like going to things like this. And we're big on CFSE, and that shows you like a system, right? And how to coach. And so like, I agree with you 100%, because starting in the industry, I've been in it for like 13 years. It's like, you're just getting your alphabet soup, but you're not really like, you're not pushing towards like a system of like, we're all on the same, you know, slightly different education levels, but we're doing all the exact same things in general. Oh, that's awesome. Speaking of that too, like what the DVRT system, like, you go into that a little bit, because it is a system. It's not another certification.
Right.
So why is it different?
I think for one, we try to start, defining that language so that at least we can communicate. It's okay for me. I'm okay with people debating ideas, but if we're not even speaking the same language, it becomes, very difficult to have a purposeful discussion on things. So for one, we wanted to define what functional training actually meant, because when I speak to a lot of coaches, I go, okay, how many of you consider yourself functional trainers? And, a lot of people raise their hand, because I'm like, if you don't, then what are you? Are you just functional trainer? So obviously, I go, okay, what does that mean? And I'll hear things like, oh, it's training for life. It's doing things like you did in life. I'm like, okay, that's kind of a philosophy. So what does that look like on a program? What makes a program a functionally based program? And I hear a lot of crickets. That's because, again, when a lot of people are taught functional training, they're taught this philosophy, not a methodology. So what we want to do is start breaking down, what is the methodology of functional training? What does it look like? What are the principles? What are the variables? So that people actually can go, hey, this is functional because of A, B, C, and D. And so, I'm trying to change people's mindset that functional training is not about replicating life. That's like saying sports-specific training is about replicating sport. That's not what it is. The namesake actually defines what it means. It means to improve the functionality of the body. The problem comes, most people don't know how the body works. Something I just talked about in my presentation recently at a conference was, we're still bodybuilding, we're just doing different bodybuilding. So instead, in the past, I joke it's good that I'm old because it gives me lots of experience of good and bad. But, we used to come in and there was a chest and back day, there was an arm day, and there was a leg day, right? There's a lot of that going on. And functional training started to change that, but it didn't really, because now we're training glutes instead of pecs. Now we're training, rotator cuffs instead of shoulders. So we're still isolating. We still don't understand how the body functions. So our programs really haven't improved. We're just changing the point of emphasis of which muscles we're emphasizing. So what we try to do is, okay, if we're going to try to, identify there's a problem, then we got to be part of the solution. So we started breaking down, hey, basic, terminology. For example, one of the key foundations to our system is something that's not unique to us, but people so poorly understand, which is progressive overload. I was just co-authoring an article with Alan Cosgrove on this, that most people misunderstand the most fundamental principle of strength training, which is progressive overload. And by that, I mean, they often think that means making a weight heavier. And while that's a variable of progressive overload, that's far from the extent of the term. And if you only know that, then you're going to be limited in the solutions you can create for your clients. And if that was the best and only solution, you and I would be lifting thousands of pounds in our programs, but we're not. We'd be going and we'd be like lifting 2,000 pounds on my squat because I've been lifting for 20 years. I better be. And so people misunderstand that progressive overload simply means adding a stress to the body greater than before. And when you break down what that means and all the variables that are available to us, there's 9 different variables that we go over. And most people, they'll have reps, they'll have sets, they'll have some volume, and maybe they'll have rest intervals, but that's usually the extent, and they're missing about 6 other variables that can impact both progression, regression, intensity over time in the programming. So that's where we really try to open people's minds. And that's where, we like the tool of the ultimate sandbag, because people need to see how that's reflected and how much versatility there is. Something I go over a lot is, probably the most damaging thing that's happened in the fitness industry happened in the 1930s, where the squat rack and the barbell became really commercialized. And, there was never a squat rack before the 1930s. And people always go, well, it's always been done this way before. I'm like, no, it hasn't. It's been done less than 100 years that way. And the barbell changed its shape from being about a 5-foot implement that didn't go very heavy to a 7-foot implement that you could load up quite a bit. And so what happened is people became so focused and single-minded upon just going heavier, they forgot about these other variables that have been around for a long time. If you look at gymnastics and martial arts and other forms of training, they utilize a lot of these concepts. And when you look at how the body functions, then it makes so much sense why these other variables come into play, and they're so important, and they add a component of intensity and progression and regression. And so when people go, oh, I'll give you an example. I had a coach that go to me, they're like, well, I like your program, but I don't understand deadlifting. I'm like, I don't know what that means. What do you mean you don't understand deadlifting? He goes, well, obviously a barbell can go heavier than ultimate sandbag. So why would I deadlift in DVRT? And I'm like, well, for one, I go, you're thinking deadlift as a singular exercise. We have about 20 different means of deadlifting. If you focus on the hip hinge, the movement pattern, you quickly realize there's a lot of different ways to create a different training stimulus through planes of motion, body position, direction, speed, and all these other variables that, we can make a really hard deadlift, maybe not in the sense that you're used to seeing it, but actually is more beneficial for a lot of people when you break down, again, how the body works. So again, when we're using the Ultimate Sandbag, we're not doing it because we're trying to get you good at sandbags. We're trying to create connections in the body to stimulate these kinetic chains that are actually responsible for how the body works. And we think that best represents the foundation of what progressive overload is supposed to be, because it gives you the ability to change all those attributes rather than a singular one. I've made some wonderful friends, jokingly being sarcastic, because I wrote an article basically how limiting the barbell is. And, it's a sagittal plane, implement. It's the one that is only based upon incremental loading. It's just because people are used to seeing it is the only reason it's the standard in our gyms. You rewind 80 years ago and it wasn't that way. So again, it's one of those things, again, educating us, because, we need to have that common ground and common language of understanding how the body works, what makes for a functional based program, what are the concepts and variables and principles of actual functional movement. And so once we get on that common ground, then people see how much more there's open to them in both creating solutions and better programs.
No, I love that. And that even opened my mind a little bit more of what you do with it. Just because, you look at a bar or a kettlebell. I'm a big kettlebell guy, right?
Sure,
but that's just a tool. It's a very versatile tool, but that shouldn't be the only thing that I use. And that makes a lot more sense to me, because like a deadlift, that's not the only pattern when I pick up my kid.
Right.
If I did that, I'd look like a crazy guy if that's the way I lifted up my kid every time I picked him up, Yeah. So I really love that. So you just got back from Perform Better this weekend, right?
Yeah.
Last weekend. What'd you kind of go over at Perform Better? What was your talk?
Whenever Chris asks me to talk, and I've been doing it for 7 years, so I don't know if they keep asking me or it keeps just showing up and they think I'm supposed to be there. But, I always try to make it something that's relevant to something I'm interested, something that I think, is something of interest to the industry, and then something I can immediately offer some input for people to go back Monday morning and use. So a lot of it was basically how to build strong and mobile shoulders, knees, and low backs. Because I call that sort of the trinity of injuries, if you will, for people. That, if you ask most coaches, does their client have a shoulder, knee, or back injury? They'll be either one or multiple of those. So having gone through that with a lot of clients myself, I wanted to give some practical understanding of why that's happening to your clients, how you can improve them quickly, and then how you can actually progress them. So if you're not even understanding why this could be happening to your client, it's going to be hard to start laying solutions. And sort of the point I wanted to drive home to people is that they're all interconnected. That actually all three of those injuries or issues are interconnected, because they're all basically a function of a couple of things. One is poor core stability. And when people hear that, they're like, oh, does that mean I need to plank more? It means understanding how to use your core. So, I always do a lot of bad movie references. I don't know if you've seen or people have seen the movie I Love You, Man. It's with Paul Rudd and Jason Segel. And, there's a couple of great scenes there. Andy Lambert is like the personal trainer that's like at Equinox. And it's Paul Rudd's brother. And I laugh at a scene because the funniest scenes are always the things that are truthful. Andy Sandberg, sorry. Andy Sandberg's throwing a mess on all those client while he's talking to Paul Rudd, and he's yelling at his client, activate your core, activate your core. And I started laughing because I know I've done those things too. And I'm like sitting back going, man, that's a really meaningless cue, isn't it? Like the thing we should be striving for is how do we get people to activate their core, and what does that mean? So how do we create a bracing system? How do we get the people to do it at the right time? And so that's where we cover a lot of things, teaching people to connect, change the body, because most people don't understand how the body's connected, and that we activate the core through using our feet and our hands, our lats. And we don't do things like squeeze the glutes. Like, can you imagine walking down the street just squeezing your glutes randomly? Like, that would be a really weird thing. But that's a cue I've given people, and I know that's, but I've learned that that's not what we want. We want to teach the glutes to create tension through using the feet, because the feet are creating the tension through the glutes. If you understand the kinetic chain and how the force comes up from the ground from your action of your foot and stimulates the glutes, locks down the pelvis, and so forth. And it impacts, when we hold a weight, we don't just hold weights, we are very deliberate with it. So if you understand that your glute and your core work with your lats, and your hands create tension that activates your rotator cuff, which connects your lat and your core, then you realize we just don't want to hold weights. We've got to be very deliberate with how we create tension against the weight and when we do so. So just really simple strategies that people are like, oh my God, look how much stronger I am. Look how much more stable my shoulder feels. Look how much better my knee feels. And when they do that, obviously the biggest challenge for a lot of clients is thinking that exercise has got to hurt to be beneficial. So we can actually teach them that it's going to actually make them feel better, then it's going to stimulate a more positive response, and they're going to want to be more consistent. And you're going to build not only a client that's more consistent and retain them better, but they're going to be the ones that can't stop talking about you. And still, I think word of mouth is the best marketing vehicle that any facility has, because that's a non-biased referral source that is genuinely enthusiastic about the work you're doing. So when we teach people those concepts and then how we layer progression, they're like, wow, not only do I never have to be bored, it's not just about having versatility. In our mind, variety is just simply purposeful progression. So if you understand progression, then you understand where to take people and you know how to take them back. And they all think just the smallest things give them a dramatically new exercise. So now you have this library of movement, that rather than just having these random exercises. Because something I always tell people is, when I ask them, well, what's your system? And they'll be like, oh, I deadlift and then I clean and I do swings. I'm like, those are exercises. That's not a system. I go, what if those exercises don't work? What do you do then? And that's where I think a lot of coaches get into trouble. They don't have a map. And they're like, oh, I have a bunch of great exercises, but I don't have a map as far as where do I take people back to? How do I build them up? How do I deconstruct an exercise into its smallest parts? And how do I teach these movement concepts to make people as successful as possible? Because most of the clients are coming in, like, I'm sure clients are not coming to your gym the first time going, here's my problem, Nick. I'm too strong. I'm too lean. I look too damn good. They're probably apprehensive. They think they're going to fail. They think they can't do this. So immediately as we take away a lot of those concepts from simple cues, I always go, our cues are made so that my mom could understand them, not so that I could impress, great cook or whoever it is in the way I deliver them. The simplest cues deliver the biggest results, have the biggest impact, and then build success. And when a client, and it's human nature, feels successful, they keep wanting to do more. So I don't know if that was sort of a roundabout way of answering it, but that's what DVRT is about, is giving people that roadmap of understanding how the body works and how do we break down each movement and layer progression from the most foundational to the very complex.
No, I love that. I mean, that's, like I told you, even being in the fitness industry for a long time, that was the biggest slap in my face, like going from just getting all those initials next to my name to finally getting into a system. And that was the biggest change, to be like, okay, now I'm a coach. I'm not just a trainer counting reps and putting them in an exercise, right? So, no, that's awesome. And even like you said, on those other things that aren't even just like progression or regressions of exercises, like doing a loaded carry teaches them so much, of just that tension and that grip strength, and take off your shoes before you deadlift, so we can get some footwork in on this. Like that's awesome. So you said how long you've been in the industry now? Like quite a while.
20 years. Yep.
Yeah, quite a while.
Quite a while.
There's probably quite a few coaches on here that are barely 20 years old.
I know, thanks for reminding me. I appreciate that.
Who are some of the great people that you think you've met over the years that you've followed, that you find their words very like rewarding to you, that kind of helps your path and develop you as a coach?
I've gone through so many different programs, and there was a time that I'd be really super enthusiastic about a program, and then over time, whether using it or just learning more, I'm like, oh, they had some good points, but it wasn't the end all be all that I thought it was. So I'll give you an example. I think one of the first people I ever started spend time learning from was Paul Chek, and Paul's a little crazy now, but like he was one of the first people to talk about functional training in a bigger concept, and he talked about connect chains and fascial lines and so forth. And his application may have been a little not perfect, but he was one of the first people. And when you're the first, sometimes it's very difficult, because when you try to change people in an industry, you definitely don't get welcomed with open arms. You definitely get generally a lot of pushback. So Paul, definitely was one of the first people to open my minds to other people. Like there's physical therapist Diane Lee that has a great, series of books that I learned a lot from, about, again, how the body functions and so forth. But then I also learned from people, from Pavel Tsatsouline. I think I told you I went to like the second or third RKC ever, and he was, opened my mind to this idea of movement. And it's very interesting, because the RKC I went to is totally different than the RKC or the Strong First that you see now. I always tell the story, like 70% of us had never touched a kettlebell, and we went over like 20 or 30 different exercises. I think it got just more streamlined over time as far as trying to make people more efficient. So, there's been just, great cook being able to, I didn't really understand FMS for a long time until I heard Gray talk one time. And what I realized it simply was, looking around the room, most coaches, A, have never thought about movement, and B, didn't have a way to quantify movement. So like things like FMS can be, criticized for all you want, but I understand his intent was really to make people think about movement and give them a way to actually quantify movement. And if you just think of it in that term, it makes a lot more sense as far as its value and what you can then do with it. I think people sort of overemphasize it or sort of bash it unnecessarily. People like Mike Boyle have been really integral in just, someone who's had over 30, 40 plus years in the industry, definitely has a lot of experience to share. And one thing I appreciate Mike, he's very open to saying, I used to believe this, now I believe that. If you're not evolving over time and experience is not teaching you things that made you change your mind, then you're probably not doing a good job. Alan Cosgrove has been a good friend for well over 13 years and one of our first supporters, and gave my sense about business and systems and so forth. And he was actually the one that came up with the name DVRT, because I came to Alan, being a friend, I'm like, I'm just so frustrated because people were, for good or bad, so fixated on the sandbag and they weren't looking at what we were doing. And it's just not what people think of when they think of sandbags. And he's like, well, you got to deliver a system. You got to get them to focus on what you're doing with it, not the implement. And so he actually is the one that came up with DVRT. So there's been so many people, and then whether it's a small thing they said to me or, a big profound moment, they've all been, obviously very, important in my development. And now it's a great opportunity to be able to talk them in a more free way and just getting them with a little more insights, or just getting them in a more casual manner and finding out, I got to speak, sit down with Mike Boyle for about 3 hours at a bar, just shooting the shit, if you will. And like, it's just interesting to hear, their personal life and their development through, their personal journey as well as their professional one.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, some of the stories that you hear like that, it's actually pretty profound because you put people on a pedestal, right? Yeah. I remember Mike even talking about like how he got his start, and it's not where you think Mike would have been, right? Like right. Working at a bar and then like changing his clothes and then running into like doing his strength and conditioning and not getting paid that much for it. He's changing in the car, I think, is what he said. So it's kind of fun to hear the other side of things too. So, I mean, that's a good question for you right there, is how did you get your start? Like, obviously you've progressed over time and learned like we all want to, right? We want to chase mastery, but like, where'd you start from and then worked your way up to here?
Well, there's 2 points. One, I actually started being interested in strength training when I was 14, because I was growing up, my sport was basketball. And around 14, I destroyed my right ankle. I landed during a basketball game at the park and just completely ripped up my right ankle. And it was right before I was going to freshman year of high school. So I think I was going to be in a cast for like 12 to 16 weeks. I actually started freshman year of high school in like crutches, which is awesome. Trying to limp around. And my older brother's like, well, you're not going to sit around and just sulk. You're going to start working out. So he took me to my first gym, and I remember being, as most teenage guys or non-teenage guys do, we got on the bench press, and there was an empty bar that completely pinned me, and I was wiggling like a worm. And of course, as an older brother would, he would naturally laugh at me, and but definitely eventually begged him to get the bar off me, which he eventually did. But I fell in love with the idea that I wasn't naturally a gifted athlete. So the more work you put into strength training, the more benefit you got. And that's not always the case in sport. There's obviously a limit with your athleticism and natural talent. And then I was fortunate enough because someone that, at the time that he was, that was a mentor of his, and someone who was guiding him, even though he didn't go into fitness or strength conditioning, just someone who was just a generally good mentor, was a high school coach of ours that split time being the assistant strength coach for the Chicago White Sox. So I got introduced to strength conditioning very early on, about 16 years old. I didn't even know that was a job you could have until then. And just, he gave me things by people like Vern Gambetta, which was like the first functional training stuff at the time. And I was like, oh, what's this all about? And, I took my first, I think it was either ACSM or NESM, like seminar at like 16, because I just wanted to know everything. And I remember being completely overwhelmed because I didn't know anything. But it would just stimulate my interest in just knowing more. And so I just became so impassioned about knowing as much as I could. And that just led, even the programs that I ended up not liking at the end of the day, I think were really important, because I think one of the hardest things to do that, I always joke that it's good being old now, because I felt overwhelmed at the time, and I'd be more overwhelmed even now with the amount of information, is developing a filter. And so one of the things that going to a lot of different programs gave me was the ability to develop a filter. But I wouldn't be able to have that filter if I didn't combine going with those programs with practical experience and working just with a lot of people. And so now I hear people speak sometimes, and it's not even that I disagree with them. They're like, oh, that's a really good idea, but there's no way that you're going to be able to implement that. Like, that's not practical. So sometimes it's not even questioning the idea itself. It's questioning, is that a practical means of actually working with real people? And sometimes, a few friends of mine, like Coach Robert Dos Remedios and I, will talk about, hey, yeah, you can tell who doesn't work with people by sometimes what they say. And like, yeah, that sounds good, but there's no way you could actually even do that. And I think in the past, being a young coach, you feel guilty and bad as though you're not a good coach because you can't do that. And as you progress and you get older and gain more experience, you realize that just wasn't very practical.
Oh, that's awesome. Like, thanks for sharing all that. I've got one more question for you, just because, like, I want to be, like, respectful of your time. Yeah. I think I said 30 minutes. We're coming up on it.
I always talk about
No, you're good. Like, I love that. Plus, it makes it easier for me, right? Just ask your question. You just flow. I just got a text from our nutritionist, and she was asking, and I know where you're going to go with this already, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Is like, do you train just like you talk? Like, hey, this is how we should train our athletes, or just general pop, practice what you preach kind of thing. That was her question. I kind of know where you're going to go with it, but
do I train myself that same way?
Yeah, you train exactly like you tell all your clients. Do you train exactly like
that?
Oh,
yeah. And it's funny you should say that, because I remember a few years ago we were at a conference in Connecticut, and I finished my presentation. This guy came up to me afterwards, like, I really like what you had to say. I really enjoy that. Just a quick question. Like, what do you actually do? I'm like, well, what do you mean? What do I actually do? He goes, well, what do you do in your workouts? I go, what I just told you. And they're like, it was funny that it baffled him, and I didn't understand why he was so baffled by that. But it did dawn on me that maybe there's people that, like, don't actually do what they talk about. And a lot of what we do was bred out of the fact that most of my life I've had to battle a very severe injury. When I was about 6 months after that ankle injury, I went back to playing basketball, and I suffered a very bad little back injury. So now, being 41, most of my life has been learning about how to deal with a back injury. About 3 years ago, that back injury disintegrated, and I ended up having 3 spinal surgeries within 10 days. So I have an anterior fusion in my lumbar spine. And so, one of the great things is having principles, again, was I was able to rehab myself. I went to a spinal clinic only for a couple of times just because I wanted to get the manual therapy, but it was our principles of movement. Like, I can train, the goal of having a system is I can train any ability level within the system. The key is just where are you starting and where are you going? And so, the system is designed to be simple, but at the same time, it's to give the coach the power to sort of decide what's my appropriate starting point and then guide them to where the appropriate place to go. So I think a misunderstanding for a lot of people is that athletes are great lifters, and generally they're not. They're really good at their sport, but I've seen some professional athletes. They're like, oh my God, you're a professional athlete, because in the gym they just have no clue. So yeah, I train exactly how I talk because it's all principally based. And so it's just depending upon what is my goal, where's my starting point, how am I getting there, what's working, what's not working. So as long as I have principles that are at the heart of what I'm doing, it's easy to manipulate an exercise, or it's easy to manipulate a program based upon just analyzing those principles and those variables, because I know how to bring it up a notch. I know how to take it back a notch. I also know how to address when something's not working. I also know to remind myself of the same cues I give other people if I don't execute an exercise well. Because, like, one of the things that we talk a lot about in DVRT is, like, I'll give you an example, is when people think of sandbags, they think about instability. And I'm like, all right, but they don't understand what instability, the ultimate sandbag, means. They just think about weight that moves. But instability comes in many forms. Instability comes in the implement itself and how we position the weight on your body, the stance we take, the direction we move. So where I'm going with that is that if you know how to create stability in light of instability, then what we're actually challenging is movement accuracy. So something at the very heart of what we're doing is challenging how accurately can you move. A lot of people think of strength as simply my ability to lift a load or produce force, but actually it's my ability to connect chains and be very accurate and efficient with my movement. something when I talk to NSCA conferences, or just, did my first year of the College Strength Conditioning Coaches Association. And when I tell strength coaches, what's the job of a strength coach? They'll be like, make people stronger, don't ask. And I'm like, no, I go, that's not actually your job. The reason athletes strength train is they hope that what they're doing is making them more efficient at their sport. They're more efficient at developing power. They're more efficient at being able to develop force. It's an efficiency game. That's why when you teach people, when we coach people, they feel stronger very quickly, not because they just got bigger muscles or whatever. It's their nervous system became more efficient, and they're actually moving better. So a lot of times overcoming injury is simply teaching people how to regain their efficiency of movement. I'll give you one last example, then I'll shut up, is that, one of the things we break down is the most fundamental human movement is gait, is walking, locomotion. And no one's going to the gym and go, today is going to be a badass gait day, right? Or a walking day. But that's where all those other movement patterns lead up to. Paul Chek talked about in the late 90s, the 7 primal movements, and they all lead to locomotion. And yet people don't understand gait. They don't understand walking. A lot of people quote Gray Cook, for example. They'll say, don't load a movement that's dysfunctional. And yet most people never look at how people walk. And walking is a very complex pattern. So where I'm going with this is that when you really break down what people are doing, our goal is to make people more efficient at what they're doing in everyday life. How we do that is understanding how the body functions. So we can break that down to the most simple level, the most foundational level, and we can build that to the super complex level. And sometimes with pro athletes, they have to do the most foundational stuff. And sometimes with general population, if you spend the right time and you progress them appropriately, they can do amazingly complex things. And so it should all come down to just understanding the system, the variables, and how to progress and regress people to the movement.
Oh, that's awesome. Like you said, pretty easy to interview you just because I can say 2 things and you can go off forever. But the good thing is great information, because I've heard that a ton of times, and you just put it in better terms than I ever have. But we always talk about I want to make my clients stronger, right? But the biggest thing is, can I make them better? Yeah. And that's the main thing, right? Is just we're all doing the system. And I love how you brought that up. It wasn't even a chime for me once, when a client's like, hey, do you train like us? I was like, yeah. One day I might not do goblet squats, I might do front squats, but it's all freaking Mexican food in the end. I'm still beans, rice, tortilla, and cheese. It doesn't matter if it's a taco or enchilada. It's the same with our program, but where's my entry point? What am I doing? For that day. I love all of this.
Appreciate it.
So you said you're down in Vegas too?
Yep.
You guys have a gym down there?
No, mostly just because I travel so much. I know you mentioned I was at Perform Bear, but I was in Asia for about 10 days before that, and I was only home for 2 days. And then I'm home till Wednesday, and then I go to Germany. So it's just not practical to have a gym. I just, working in a facility, managing people is challenging, and so it's managing a gym and this would be a bit much. But we work with our NSCA state director has a facility not too far from us, so anytime we use a facility, he's very gracious, letting us allowed to use it. And he uses basically his gym is just set up DVRT style. And we say DVRT, not Ultimate Sandbag, because there's other tools, but we use all the tools with the same intent as far as the system and the progressions and the concepts. So his gym is really well set up and organized, and that's a big part of what they do.
Awesome. Well, I'll let you go just because I know we went a little bit over.
No problem.
Sure I could ask you another question. We'll go for another hour.
Always happy talking if you couldn't tell.
Dude, I appreciate you hopping on too, Josh. That was awesome. Great content.
My pleasure.
I'll hold you again too, because that's, like I said, maybe we'll have you down sometime just because I've been loving talking to you. Great conversation, great insight too on everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Be happy to anytime.
But again, thanks again. I'll email you after this. Thanks for hopping on the call.
My pleasure.
Talk to you soon.
Thanks, Nick. I look forward to talking to you, man.
Cool. Thanks, Josh.